same sort of social behavior exhibited by Homo sapiens is already present in their primate relatives like baboons and chimpanzees.
Yes.
And there is no reason to invest human morality with any more objective significance than that kind of behavior that evolution is programmed into other primate species because it's advantageous in the struggle for survival. It's just a herd morality.
That is not how we progress.
That's
what
not what?
What civilization is, what moral progress is.
Wait, where do you get the word progress
I get the progress.
A naturalistic worldview? I think on a naturalistic worldview, you would be justified in talking about moral change, but the word progress smuggles in a standard.
But that's because you think on a naturalist basis, on a purely naturalist basis, there is no way to justify, to ground objective morality. That's what you,
True.
I mean, right. Since I don't buy that premise, I do think that one can talk about moral progress.
Could I read you a quotation, and I want you to comment on it?
Sure.
The scientific outlook has taught us that some parts of our subjective experience are products of our biological makeup and have no objective counterpart in the world. The tastiness of fruit and the foulness of carrion, the scariness of heights and the prettiness of flowers are features of our common nervous system. And if our species had evolved in a different ecosystem, or if we were missing a few genes, our reactions could go the other way. Now, if the distinction between right and wrong is also a product of brain wiring, why should we believe it any more real? And if it is just a collective hallucination, how could we argue that evils like genocide and slavery are wrong for everyone rather than just distasteful to us? That's a statement by Steven Pinker.
Well,
But taken together, the fact that science is omnipotent, and the fact that I can understand why people like you desperately want to believe in God, that is an argument against the existence of God.
But two fallacious arguments put together don't make a sound argument, right?
They are, but do you deny that science cannot account for everything?
Yes, I do deny that science.
So what can't it account for?
Well, had you brought that up in the debate, I had a number of examples that I was going to give. I think there are a good number of things that cannot be scientifically proven, but that we're all rational to accept. Let me list 5. Logical and mathematical truths cannot be proven by science. Science presupposes logic and math, so that to try to prove them by science would be arguing in a circle. Metaphysical truths, like there are other minds other than my own, or that the external world is real, or that the past was not created 5 minutes ago with an appearance of age, are rational beliefs that cannot be scientifically proven. Ethical beliefs about statements of value are not accessible by the scientific method. You can't show by science whether the Nazi scientists in the camps did anything evil as opposed to the scientists in Western democracies. Aesthetic judgments, number 4, cannot be accessed by the scientific method because the beautiful, like the good, cannot be scientifically proven. And finally, most remarkably, would be science itself. Science cannot be justified by the scientific method. Science is permeated with unprovable assumptions. For example, in the special theory of relativity, the whole theory hinges on the assumption that the speed of light is constant in a one-way direction between any 2 points A and B. But that strictly cannot be proven. We simply have to assume that in order to hold to the theory.
But you're missing the whole...
So put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So we are... none of these beliefs can be scientifically proven, and yet they are accepted by all of us.
Experiences, the appearances of Jesus. How do we account for that? How can we say that they could possibly have had such an experience? Now, one of the standard characteristics of many hallucinations is that they seem extremely real. So, very many of these experiences, which occur, as I say, to a very considerable segment of the population, seem extremely real at the time.
These cases have to be assessed on a case-by-case basis.
Of course.
You can't dismiss the resurrection narratives on the basis that some other spurious miracle stories have occurred. You have to assess each one on its own merits. And what I fear from your response is that this watchword, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, is really just an excuse for an a priori rejection of the miraculous, because you didn't give any sort of evidence that would satisfy you with respect to one of these extraordinary claims. It made it sound like, to me, you were saying that nothing would convince you, no matter what.
No, all sorts of things would convince me.
Well, with respect to the resurrection, though, I mean, you said if there was a video camera, you'd say it was a fake stone that was rolled away. You know, I mean, what sort of...
That would be the more reasonable hypothesis under the circumstances.
Well, but see, that's what I fear. It is. It's just an a priori rejection of the miraculous here. You're not. There isn't any kind of literary testimony, historical testimony that could convince you.
So once again, these extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence in no way implies a bias against the supernatural.
But you're saying that when you say extraordinary, really what you're saying is no amount of evidence would convince me of these extraordinary claims.
Sure it would. If tomorrow morning, immediately after breakfast, suddenly there was an earthquake, you know, and a silvery light shone in the sky, and the leaves dropped from the trees, and I dashed outside, and there, towering over us like 100 Everests, was this giant figure with lightning playing around his Michelangeloid face, and he pointed down and saying, "Be assured, Keith M. Parsons, that I do in fact exist, and I'm sick of your logic chopping." Dr. Craig, I would join you in the pew of the church, in the front pew of the church the next Sunday.
Be going to the question and answer period. We're going to go to the question and answer period, so be going to the microphone as we wind this down.
You don't think that you would have said, "Oh, I was having a hallucination." I was simply saying that this is not a mere matter of speculation, that there's more than a tiny bit of evidence on the table.
What is the beginning doesn't imply a God.
It does if the first premise is true, that whatever begins to exist has a cause. It logically follows that
but the cause hasn't got to be God.
Well, remember I gave an argument for thinking that this cause is timeless, spaceless, immaterial, enormously powerful, and personal.
I think it's a computer.
Well, that wouldn't... computers are designed by people.
No, this is a self-designing computer.
Timeless.
Timeless.
Well, that's a contradiction in terms.
Why is it timeless? What's contradictory about it?
A computer has to function. It takes time.
Oh, no, this is a special computer.
Yeah, but it has to be logically coherent.
Oh, it's logically coherent?
Yes, you have to be logically coherent.
Oh, no, this computer is amazing.
No, besides, it would have to be, as I said, a personal being.
No.
A computer is a physical
Not this computer.
object.
Oh,
well, then,
no.
Okay, see, what you're doing is what you're calling a computer is really God. A non-physical, It's just another word if you rob it of all the attributes that make it a computer.
Dr. Kappel has touched upon the fact that we do not necessarily have to use God as our undetectable creator of everything. We could use the flying spaghetti monster.
I think I dealt with that in the debate. The arguments, if they're successful, give you an immaterial, transcendent reality that exists beyond time and space and that brought all matter and energy into existence. The flying spaghetti monster is made out of a couple of meatballs and a bunch of spaghetti. It's a material entity that cannot exist beyond time and space and therefore cannot be the cause of the universe. So unless we're talking incoherent nonsense, you can see that the type of theism that we get to is going to have very specific properties of this being that will exclude things like the flying spaghetti monster.
Hi, I'd like to follow up on the previous lady's question. It seemed to me like most of your evidence for proving your 4 facts was predicated on Scripture itself. So my question is, why is it that we take the New Testament to be of such validity?
Think of the burial account of Jesus. I am in no way, as I said, privileging the New Testament. We're looking at all of the ancient sources for Jesus, But what we have in the case of the burial is...
What sources support this story besides the New Testament?
Why do you ask that question?
Because
you see,
I feel
that question betrays the assumption that the sources in the New Testament are somehow suspect and are not to be taken as evidence. But if something's outside the New Testament, now that's real evidence.
Oh, I apologize. I'll clarify.
Now that's question begging, because what I'm saying is that you look at all of the sources that we have for the life of Jesus equally, and that in the case of the Gospels, these are the earliest and most primitive sources that we have for the life of Jesus. And so to ignore them in favor of extra-biblical sources would be simply mad as historical methodology. The historian always will look at the earliest, most primitive documents as his most reliable documents. And what I tried to show this evening is that these facts are, for example, take the burial, multiply independently attested in early documents. And this is one of the most important criteria that historians use for establishing a fact of ancient history.
Right, which brings me to my question, right? What other sources attest to this burial story?
In the case of the burial account, there's something like 5 different sources, independent sources, some of which are among the earliest of the New Testament. I mentioned 2 in my talk tonight. This pre-Pauline formula that Paul quotes in his first letter to the church in Corinth, Greece, is information that comes from...
Shouldn't the letters from the apostles also be taken with a grain of salt in that case? It just seems to me like the validity, the truth of the resurrection is dependent on the truth of Scripture, and the truth of Scripture is dependent on...
You have not shaken loose yourself from the presupposition that this is somehow an inspired document and that you believe in it because it's inspired. That's not the way critical historical Jesus scholars work. And it's not a matter of the fact that Paul says it. As I say, what's critical here is that Paul is quoting from a pre-Pauline tradition that goes back to within the first 5 years after the crucifixion. This is a source which is incredibly close to the original events, which Paul himself used, quotes, and passes on. So it has nothing to do with Paul. He's just the intermediary who passed on this tradition. Similarly with the pre-Mark and Passion story. Mark may have been written in the early 60s, but the pre-Mark and Passion story goes back even earlier than that. Many scholars will date it around AD 40 or so. That's just 10 years after the death of Jesus. Now, you compare that with sources for, say, the life of Alexander the Great, where the earliest sources or earliest biographies we have of Alexander are written by Arrian and Plutarch 400 years after the death of Alexander. And yet they're still regarded by classical historians as largely reliable accounts of his death. The sources that we have for the life of Jesus are just incredibly close to the events that they are about, and therefore they are taken extremely seriously by historians today. And you can't write them off because hundreds of years later, the church collected these documents, put them under one cover, and called it the New Testament, right? I mean, originally there wasn't any such thing as the New Testament. There were just all these separate documents written in the Greek language, like Paul's letter to the church in Corinth, Paul's letter to the church in Thessalonica, Luke's gospel of the life of Jesus, John's gospel of the life of Jesus. All of these various documents were then later collected and put under one cover called the New Testament. And therefore it's just bad historical methodology to say, oh, that's in the New Testament, therefore this isn't an important historical source or isn't a valuable historical source. That's just treating it anachronistically. You've got to treat these documents for what they originally were
and then look at or apply the criteria for historicity.
Can God display or disobey logical truths? And I'd like to use Dr. Klemens' example. For example, can he create a stone too heavy for himself to lift?
I would say God cannot do logically impossible tasks.
My following question is, how is God all-powerful in that?
Well, because omnipotence is not defined as the ability to do that which is logically absurd. I mean, in one sense, to do a task that is logically impossible is not a task at all. That's just a self-contradictory combination of words. So that it's no inhibition of omnipotence to say that God cannot do what is logically impossible. And that's the way most theists historically have always understood it. Now, of course, on the other hand, if you say, well, God can do the logically impossible, then there's no problem. Then he can make a stone too heavy for him to lift, and then he can lift it. And if you say, well, but that's logically contradictory, well, all right, he can do the logically impossible. So, either way, it doesn't seem to be, I think, an inhibition of God's power.
From those two premises, that nature exists and that there is no bridge to a supernatural reality, do you really think that it follows that nature is all there is?
That is the most reasonable conclusion remaining so far.
By what logical rule of inference does that follow? It seems to me that from those two premises, all that follows is we don't know if there is something beyond nature.
Let me try an analogy. Suppose, to see how my reasoning process works, let me try an analogy. Suppose you have a large sum of money you wish to invest, and I'm a broker, and I'm telling you the stock market's going up and up and up and up and up. And you say to me, well, now look, I'm pretty happy with my bank checking account. My money's really safe. Give me several positive good reasons for investing it in the stock market. And after you get past the third or fourth one, you stop me and you say, no, I'm not going to additionally try to put my money in the stock market. I don't want my money there. You haven't given me enough good reasons.
Okay, now,
the naturalist is somebody who retains belief in nature. This
illustrates my point. That person has not given you reasons to believe the stock market is going up. But that doesn't allow you anyway logically to conclude that therefore the stock market isn't going to go up or that it's going to go down. You simply have to withhold judgment. You see, it seems to me your reasoning here is logically invalid.
Let me again try to explain very briefly without taking up your valuable time. Look, suppose your stockbroker said, well, why are you so hesitant to invest money in the stock market? After all, you can't prove that the stock market won't go up. Should you say, well, come a day, I'm getting rich. I can't prove the stock market isn't going up. I'm going to get rich.
Come on, now, look, Dr. Shook.
That's unwise
Dr. Shook, please, let's be serious. The point is, the point is,
I assure you, I'm serious about money.
From the lack of evidence that the market will go up, it does not follow that therefore the market will not go up.
I just
agreed to that. But it doesn't follow that it's going to go down.
I agree with that point entirely.
And yet naturalism is the view that there is nothing beyond the physical world on your definition, and you admit you cannot prove that.
An agnostic is somebody who cannot prove that supernaturalism is false. But again, that in and of itself is not a positive reason to go ahead and jump into the
But has anybody offered in tonight's debate the claim that because you can't show supernaturalism to be false, therefore you should believe in supernaturalism? Who has argued that tonight?
Well,
nobody. I've given five positive arguments for supernaturalism, and we've not heard any positive arguments for naturalism. All you have said is that my arguments fail, but that doesn't serve to establish that the material world is the only reality there is. There could be something beyond it.
There could be something beyond it, and I've already told you it might be more nature.
That's a self-contradiction, friends. Those who say that there may be more nature beyond it, it's still nature. That doesn't say there is something beyond nature.
As for the other part of that this is a human being, the question is, what about the loss of the life of a being that is so small you can scarcely see it with the naked eye? What about, is that really serious? Approximately 1/2 of all conceptuses are spontaneously aborted. Spontaneously aborted, to which we have to add another 1 million or maybe 1.5 million of deliberate abortions. But they're spontaneously aborted at so early a stage that the woman first thinks she has had a late period. I mean, first she thinks she's pregnant. Then she has a period after all. She says, oh, it was just delayed. So you see, having learned spontaneous abortions, this throws an utterly new light on the thought that anything that has 46 chromosomes in it of the right sort is a human being. And we really should go back to stick with the time-honored legal principle that it's not a human being until it is born alive. Before then, it's not a human being. You deal with it some other way.
I think we basically agree that the issue is the fetus human? And if the fetus is human, then to kill it would be homicide. I think we agree on that general principle. So the question is, the biological question is this a human being? And I find it incredible to think that, say, a baby at 8 months gestation, which if born premature would survive, is not a human being just because it's geographically located inside the uterus instead of outside of it. So, but let me also respond to the point about the spontaneous abortions or miscarriages. I don't think that argument's very persuasive, because an analogous argument would be, look, every human being dies eventually. Therefore, there's nothing wrong with ending somebody's life, because they're all going to, they're going to die anyway. That's sort of the same sort of reasoning. Many of these fetuses die spontaneously, therefore it's nothing wrong with your killing such a being. That's like saying because human beings all are mortal and die by accidents and disease and so forth, therefore it's all right to kill them. That just seems illogical to me.